Hello, everyone. Carlos here. So, on today's video, we're going to be talking about the midnight blizzard hack of Microsoft. So, Microsoft got hacked by the Russian SRB, and I have here with me one of our experts in the company, Edwin David. He's from our CloudForce team. So, he's one of our experts when it comes to Azure specifically. He works a lot with a Zoom breach type of engagement, pen testing of Azure platforms. And so I wanted to bring him in, given that this hack specifically happened against a test environment from Microsoft. So, Edwin, how are you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on here. I'm just very humble for the invite and the discussion. I'm looking forward for everything.
Yeah, in fact, when it comes to anything cloud, I go to your team, given all of the work that you guys do. And in fact, I think I was talking with one of the guys from the incident response team. And one of the trends that we have been seeing since the end of last year to now that we're seeing kind of like an uptake is all of the perimeter types of attacks against devices in the perimeter, routers, switches, VPN appliances, and cloud. And I think they go to hand in hand because what happens is that before, if your router, if you needed to unplug it, you could still operate inside of your own corporate environment. But now that everything's cloud, I take out my router, I take out my VPN appliance, I'm not able to operate because I still need to go to the cloud.
Yeah.
And when it comes to cloud, after COVID, everybody decided like, oh, we need a cloud presence because everybody now is remote. So we need to work remote, and cloud affords me to do all of this stuff. But nobody knows how to manage it. Nobody, they're learning. And all of those years of experience and polishing that we saw on Prem with Active Directory, with managing desktops, configuration management, kind of like went out the window with cloud.
Yeah. During COVID, I kind of got the feeling that a lot of enterprises were rushing to adapt so that they could continue to do business. And some of those processes just involve syncing on-prem users out to the cloud, trying to adopt and deploy safeguards such as MFA, and then on top of that, accessing all these different company services from a home internet connection. And there's still a lot of companies that are on traditional VPNs and stuff like that adds a layer of protection. But that introduced, I think, a little bit of a different dynamic. And now that those rollouts are largely done, people are working hybrid. We're having I think we're seeing a catch-up period where now organizations are taking a look at cloud and trying to secure their people and their devices better. And I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but I think that's just the state that we're in right now, where people are trying to secure their people and their devices.
Yeah.
And that's where
And even Microsoft, I think, wasn't ready for this in general, because we saw it with some of the hacks that happened to the Department of State and other agencies last year, where Microsoft wasn't providing the right logins or log information to be able
yeah.
to track this across licenses. Even Microsoft didn't have the foresight to enable a bunch of stuff because it was new.
Yep.
We saw it as an SKU, and lo and behold, now they have been the target of a target attack by the Russians. I think that was coming. They knew that they were a target of them, given that they moved all of the government of Ukraine over and they have been providing those services. But this hack is unique in terms that it wasn't that somebody hacked them to get somewhere else. It was, I see it myself as a counterintelligence type of operation. So this specific group, Midnight Blizzard, which is APT 29 or Russian SVR, what happens is they went in and they started via a password attack against a test instance. From there, they moved laterally, and they were looking for information specifically about themselves. They were going like, what do they know about us? What do they know about our TTPs? Which is very interesting. So that specific attack about password spraying is one that you guys do very often. I've seen from your reports, correct?
Yeah, from an unauthenticated perspective, really it's in a couple different phases. We will try to gather as much valid accounts as possible through different means and methods. And then the next phase of that approach is doing some low and slow, just weak password spraying, starting out with like months, dates, years, just really kind of the low hanging fruit to see if we can get some initial access or a foothold to a cloud tenant. So yeah, that's absolutely where some of these attacks will start. Just looking at the Midnight Blizzard threat activity profile, credential password spraying is definitely a technique that they've been using, and to stay under the radar. Whenever I did read their Intel profile, they're using residential proxies and anonymizers, and it seems like they're doing it very carefully and methodically, where they're not tripping any alarms or alerts when they do this type of activity. So, but yeah, password spraying is one method of where some of this starts. Obviously, there's other things in any threat actor's tool belt where they could gain access into a cloud, such as social engineering and phishing, and stealing session cookie data and tokens in the cloud.
Yeah, and right now the only thing we have to go from is a very short text that Microsoft provided on the incident itself in their Securities and Exchange Commission report, where they said that they were hacked. The hack actually happened in November. They were not able to actually detect or be able to perform incident response and evict the actor until January. So the way I would see it, if it was kind of like, and this is my theory, if they were able to get into a test instance and from there moved over into the internal systems, it had to be that somebody from testing with high privileges decided to more than likely connect to their email from, let's say, a VM or somewhere else, where that token was exposed to the attackers on the machine, and token stealing and token manipulation, just like we do in Active Directory with Kerberos, or we get the AAD cookie from machines so we can then laterally move over to the cloud. I bet that kind of like happened over there in the cloud in that test instance.
Yeah, that's absolutely one way. There's other lateral movement means, such as like guest access into other tenants, and maybe this will shine a light on those type of activities as well. So one thing, not to really make assumptions with what happened here, but in general, um, uh, let's just take managed service providers, for instance, where they may be managing other Azure tenants and those types of environments. Sometimes you may get invited as a guest, so you can do things in a separate Azure tenant without creating new credentials and that sort of thing in the target tenant. And if those credentials are ever compromised or exposed, one thing that an attacker can do is they can look at into Entra ID and see if those credentials have access to other tenants besides the tenant that they're in. So that's definitely another way that attackers can laterally move into a test tenant, into like a production tenant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, absolutely. Those other things are at play too. There could have been multiple means of that lateral movement.
And this attack, I know that a lot of people are harping on Microsoft, like, hey, you got hacked. Uh, you have lack security, and I know a lot of people over there at the Microsoft security side, Netcar, Cyber War Dog, and many others. And those guys are on point. They have their T's crossed, their I's dotted. But I think when it comes to cloud environment, it offers a bunch of challenges that are unique to the platform itself, given how exposed it is, because it has to be exposed. Everybody has to be able to connect to it. That's why Microsoft, sadly, a couple of weeks before they actually got attacked, they weren't like, yeah, we're going to put a extra effort like we did for trustworthy computing, and we're going to work on securing all of this stuff. And people will go like, oh, they didn't prioritize their own stuff. And go like, yeah, it makes sense. You kind of like prioritize first your corporate side and customers, but your test and development environment would probably be the last one in terms of priority. So
Yeah.
I cannot fault them for that, because the way I see it is any determined attacker is going to get it. And in this case, if you have the budget of a nation state behind you and the resources of a nation state to target you, chances are you're going to get in. And that's where it becomes very important. How do you perform all of your testing for this stuff? And that's why many times I go to our customers, and when they ask me, hey, what do you recommend that we do? And I go like, when it comes to cloud, first I recommend do an assessment of your environment. How secure is it? Are you following best practices? When it comes to what your team does, pen testing and playing the bad guy, I tell them you need to do assume breach, because you're going to get the best bang for buck
Yep.
if you do assume breach. Uh, and it will show you what kind of logs and what kind of fields you have to go through, because the logs from cloud, from O365, from Entra ID, and this is a critique to Microsoft, they're dense. They have way too much verbosity in them in terms of information that may or may not be useful when you're performing an IR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to kind of echo off that, in terms of logging, the other thing that uh, you know enterprises need to take stock in is just their licensing levels. For instance, with the hack that occurred last year, where a number of companies got breached and they didn't have appropriate licensing for those mail items accessed. And now Microsoft is, changing those where customers can gain access to those logs under uh, under a lesser form of licensing. Before you had to have like an E5 P2 license to gain access to those types of logs. So there's still some things that that you need licensing for. Just for example, if you're on a free tier of Azure, you may need to have P1 to get certain logging ingestion, going, and really kind of two, um, enterprises need to prioritize on what kind of logs that they need to ingest. There's certain logs that are free, like within Sentinel, but
Mm-hmm.
not everybody is using Sentinel. They're using, we're coming from, uh, there are enterprises that are coming from environments where they have to utilize a on-premises logging SIEM. So
Elastic, QRadar, solutions like those.
yeah, those solutions, and then now you're needing expertise into streaming those logs into like an event hub and ingesting them on-prem, and hoping that the way that the logs are kind of flushing out is you can make some type of intelligence, security intelligence sense out of them. So, there could be some logging gaps there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Oh yeah.
so yeah, that's what I recommend is, if if somebody's approaching trusted sec, get a assessment done first, and understand what you're doing as far as like best practices first, before you come and get a pen test. The last thing I want to see is some security controls that are not in place that maybe should have been before a pen test is performed. But either way, we catch those things, and we want to make sure that, if we get in, the bad guys don't after some type of remediation takes place.
Yeah, that's why I call it the power of the default. Many people go with the default. We see it on-prem with EDRs, like, oh, I have an EDR, my EDR's protecting me, and then you use Rundle32, which it's so noisy that almost every EDR ignores because it's so noisy because you need to tune it. So the power of the default kind of comes in and bites you in the butt, where I use Rundle32 and I bypass your EDR, and now I have execution in your environment. And they go like, but I had an EDR, but have you tuned it? Have you gone and done a configuration assessment of your EDR? Have you tested it by doing a peer report team type of engagement? And they go like, no, same thing happens in cloud. Like, oh, it's there. It works. I have it. I have the proper licensing, but then all of a sudden you have 30 days of logs or less.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really difficult to do any type of attribution if you are limited to only like 30 days, and then an IR team comes in to assess the situation, and then it becomes an unfortunate process of you don't know how long the threat actor has been in the environment for, because the logs are just they're gone.
Yeah, I actually work with the IR team, coding the tool that they use for analyzing business emails compromise, and the amount of different logs that I had to go through, XML, JSON, correlate the data, this field goes with this field, and then write some of the logic to surface some of the common attacks, like somebody adding a secondary method of authentication, adding rules, adding all of that stuff. Those are multiple different logs from different sources when it comes to the cloud that you need to correlate just to get one picture. And many times what I was bumping my head against was that the test cloud instance, we forgot to enable this. Oh, we forgot to enable that. And that's where having a kind of like that initial assessment, as you mentioned, like making sure you have your T's crossed and your I's dotted, becomes so important. So when you guys do assume breach, how do you guys proceed with doing those? Like the customer gives you access to a machine that is Azure AD joined in a hybrid environment. And also, I think you also, that's kind of like the preferred one, because that's normally what you guys believe that is going to happen out there in the world. Somebody does a phishing and they get into a machine, and then they pivot from on-prem to cloud. And there's the also like, oh, let's do it from the cloud where you get an account, correct?
Yeah. So from a Zoom breach perspective, we could be given company laptops, internal
Mm-hmm.
IDs, depending on the approach that that someone wants to take, whether it's a malicious insider, or if it's hey, you've gained access to a device that meets our corporate compliance policies, and more importantly, it has access to meet conditional access threat holds. So we're in from an internal perspective. Social engineering definitely becomes a part of that, because I don't know the stats on how often somebody is password spraying externally from the cloud. They get in, and then it depends on what type of MFA is implemented. And I think threat actors gravitate to social engineering and stealing tokens or cookie session data so that they can get around MFA, and gain access to cloud resources and data. So that's one way, an assumed breach could go, where there could be a social engineering component, and we're trying to gain access to what other people have access to. And then we do, our more traditional pen testing where we are attacking the cloud externally with the goal of getting in. And the way that kind of works is we typically ask for a low privileged user account. So
Hmm.
if Smart Lockout has completely shut us out from doing any password spraying operations, which Smart Lockout has gotten better over the years, where it's able to detect malicious activity a lot faster. We still need an account to get in and test and see what type of data that a low privilege user would have access to. And I think that's extremely important to a client, especially if token thefts can occur off-prem from that account, or B, if there's like some over provisioning of access somewhere that those accounts can get into that they probably shouldn't have. A
That
really
actually
good
happens a lot. The
Yeah, it
overprovisioning.
does. So, one of the things that I'll check is I'll see if I have access to like any writable groups
Hmm.
within the cloud environment, and sometimes those writable groups may include like a shared mailbox. Maybe it's public, and um, and that's just one of those lateral movement paths where I can start searching the mailbox for like passwords and that sort of thing, and kind of laterally move from there. There are other opportunities too, such as SharePoint Online. We'll look at that from like a low priv perspective and go through documents that may have plain text passwords stored in them, things like that. So we
I know
kind
of
of
an
we kind
I
of
know
look
of an
at
instant of an Excel spreadsheet full of
yeah,
passwords.
yeah, just full of passwords, and that's an unfortunate reality too that is still occurring. Um, and uh, from a low priv perspective, I think it's good to give clients that feedback on what your low privilege users can get into. So some of that low hanging fruit can be buttoned up, so that it does limit the foothold the attacker has to escalate some privileges within Azure.
And that's one of the discussions I was having with a reporter yesterday about the Microsoft hack specific. They're going like, well, if it was a test system, how were they able to get to other high privileged users? And I go like, well, we don't know for what that was a test system for. We don't know the
Yeah.
type of relationship that tenant had with other tenants inside of Microsoft. Also, we don't know if it was a stolen token from one of those developers or an IT guy. And that IT guy is going to have privileges on the environment itself. Specifically via email nowadays, it's used for everything. We use it for
Mm.
multi-factor authentication, verification. As you mentioned, there's SharePoint Online. Actually, forgot about that one. I know of a water authority that got hacked that way, where the attacker was able to steal the token, go into the SharePoint Online, and then it was for one of the IT guys, and there was a spreadsheet with all of the username and passwords for several of their test instances and servers that were also connected in the same subnet as a lot of the production stuff. So
Yeah.
that was enabled. They were, or that was kind of like an entry point for them. So that's very clear. Now that we move over to the cloud and we put so much stuff into it, those are treasure troves of information. And
Right.
he was actually telling me like, oh, but Microsoft says that they got impacted and this was hampering some of their operation. I go like, yeah, because if you're monitoring attackers and the attackers all of a sudden know everything that you know, they're going to modify their TTPs. And in the case of
Mhm.
cloud, given the amount of logs and complexity of the logs, even though they're developers of it, they have to still deal with some of the same constraints that we users actually have to deal with to be able to deal with that.
Yeah, and getting around of some of those security controls, it may not be a password spray and hey, you're in and you're done. Um, the threat actor can take a step back and research who the person is. Where, LinkedIn is a
Hmm.
really good example where they can see a general geographic location of where they work at. The attacker can take over a residential proxy that may be close to that target. And when you have things such as user risk behaviors, the threat actor can maybe get close or maybe even bypass those types of security checks and get in without throwing any type of an alarm. So, there's just really a lot of, I think, thought and time that some of these threat actors will take, especially if it comes to a password spraying attack or even a token theft, because they want to fly under that radar and stay undetected as long as they can. And in this case, um, they Microsoft detected this on January 12th. And I believe the article stated that it started back in November of 2023. So
Yep.
that at least tells me that some precautions were taken about how they were going about this
Yeah,
and staying.
situational awareness. Where did I land? How do I behave? How many queries do I run? When do I run them? Is it during their own work hours? Are they off that day? Then I don't run anything. There's a
Yeah.
lot of parameters that an advanced attacker like this would take into consideration, especially given that I used to be in the research team and everybody in that team used to work for a intelligence agency. And sometimes we talk craft and they talk about everything that goes into place that many times in pen testing and red teaming, we don't consider because we have the time constraint that the customer wants it in 2 weeks or a month
Yeah.
or a month and a half.
Yeah. Generally I've constrained to maybe a week or two, depending on the environment. And I have to throw the kitchen sink out at everything very quickly to just weed out any possible security issues in the cloud environment.
And
So,
even then, they don't see many of your actions.
yep. So, OPSEC is definitely not top of mind for me with some of my time constraints. But if it's something longer, an attacker has, that they don't have any scope, they don't have any time constraints, and they have as much time as they need to think about things very thoroughly, even once they get into some initial access into the cloud.
Yeah, and that goes in line with a blog post that I'm actually writing about 0 days, and with some of the videos that I have been putting out, where a lot of our customers are very worried about 0 days, 0 days, 0 days, 0 days of that initial access. And I go like, when you look at the reports on how everything was detected, was that at some point or another, once they get access, unless they're lucky enough to get into the CEO's machine with that specific fish, or the CEO's assistant, or the CIO or legal head, they have to be super lucky. They still need to do lateral movement. They're
Yep.
still going to do enumeration of the environment. Everything that is associated with situational awareness, find the data, exfiltrate the data, and that's where we catch them. Having all of that very well lined up, and that's where I think you get the most bang for your money when it comes for any environment, cloud or not cloud. And I think more than likely they made some mistake on OPSEC. Uh, a query that somebody noticed or an access that somebody went like, I don't remember doing the search or something like that,
Yeah.
that kind of like raised the first alarm. And then Microsoft started going through all of their logs and being able to practice that. And that's when it comes the practice also of the assume breach. People go like, oh no, you're measuring my controls. And I go like, no, we're also measuring your SOC. We're measuring your blue team. We're measuring your security
Yeah.
team. How fast can they respond? Say if it is malicious or not, and if they have suspicion, do they have processes and systems in place to then track down that behavior? And the only way that they can do it is that you can do fantasy football for a long time, but then I put you in the field and you're going to fail. You
Yeah.
actually need to go into field and practice, and you need to go through all of those exercises. That's why testing becomes so important.
Yep.
Cool. So, Edwin, thank you for your time. Uh, I'm going to be editing and putting out this video. I thought it was important, and that's why I wanted to bring you in, because anytime it comes to Azure, your name comes up. Like today, I was talking with the IR guys, and they're like, "Nope, Edwin, Edwin." So
Yeah.
your name came up like 10 times
Yeah.
when it comes to everything Azure. So, any last comments?
I think the only last comments I have is I'm sure that now that this information is out, a lot of people are probably asking questions. How can I make sure that I'm secure? And outside of getting a pen test, getting an assessment done, I think the best approach on some of this is understanding what your conditional access policies are doing, making sure that your users are protected with MFA,
Mm-hmm.
with some type of number matching system. And then for at least from a SOC standpoint, look at those indicators where there's something odd going on, like atypical travel, where a user A is logged into a device in like
Mm-hmm.
Michigan, but now a couple minutes later they've logged into a device from California. So um, just some of those recommendations. And then, like I said earlier, when I was talking about Azure AD guests, access reviews is only a P2.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have Azure P2 to run uh, guest reviews or access reviews, if you will, on guests. But
Yeah.
take inventory of what kind of guests you have in your environment right now. Make sure that you have conditional access policies in place to ensure that those guests are using MFA if they are accessing your tenant.
Checking your licensing to make sure that you're covering all of that
Checking your
stuff.
licensing, just really kind of all those things. And if you don't have licensing for access reviews,
Mm-hmm.
you can very easily export the guests out of your system and make a determination um, if guest access is still needed, because in some cases some accounts may be lying dormant and you don't know about it, and it's better to take care of those things.
That's why important to
So
go through that exercise beforehand, because more than likely you're going to have to fill some of those gaps by scripting against the Graph API. And that's
yeah,
another skill that you're going to need. You need to, cloud is something where you need to train people. It is not like, oh, here's a book. They grab the book. Now that you're the SME, it doesn't work like that. Cloud changes so much.
it does. It does. If somebody is looking for training, I highly, if they're getting started in cloud,
Mm-hmm.
highly recommend Microsoft Learn. They have several really good interactive modules that teaches you just even some of the basics down to some more intermediate concepts of securing cloud environments. I definitely recommend that if anybody is looking for a place to start.
It's important to know those basics.
It is. It's very important to know the fundamentals.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome, dude. Happy to have had this chat with you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.